It's around the early part of the year 1999. Using my pocket money, I purchased the most recent edition of the official PlayStation magazine. Usually, I would skim through the magazine as I walked back from the store, excitedly looking at screenshots of new and upcoming games, before reading the reviews once getting back home. It was a sort of tradition for me. However, this time, my eyes were instantly drawn to the demo disc attached to the front of the magazine itself. And that demo disc was, and I can say this off the top of my head, demo disc number 42. Let's check if I'm right. Success! I was correct! A decent lineup of games are listed on the back, including a selection of Net Eurose titles, but it's the title on the case itself that really caught my eye. Metal Gear Solid. Just look at that title. Look at the font, the design, everything about it is just so iconic for me. I know the font that they would use would change from Metal Gear Solid 2 onwards, but for me, personally, when I think of the series, I always picture this logo, this font. It's perfect. Now, I remembered reading about it a few times, I'd seen screenshots of alpha and beta gameplay, and I think I'd seen a trailer on a previous demo disc. Plus, if I'm absolutely honest, I thought the name sounded really cool. I was a kid, to be fair, come on, give me a break. But hear me out. Just say the name to yourself, and pause between each individual word. Metal Gear Solid. All three individual words have impact, and they brought about mental images of intense action. It can also depend on how you pronounce the title, otherwise it can sound silly. Here's a perfect example. Die Hard is a fantastic film, an absolute genre classic, and one of the best action films not only of the 80s, but of all time as well. But take a look at that title again. Just look at the title. Just read it to yourself. It's a little silly, isn't it? Oh, I get it, because it's difficult to kill him. So it's hard for him to die, so he dies hard. It's very clever, you see. But when you say it with a touch of pizzazz,
Die Hard,
it instantly sounds so much better, doesn't it? It's the same with Metal Gear Solid. God, those words go so well together. Each one of them sounds like a bullet is being fired and another fed into the chamber whilst the lifeless corpses of your enemies crashes to the ground. Anyway, I quickly pop Demo 42 into my beloved PlayStation 1 and I instantly go straight to Metal Gear Solid. And you know what? There was a surprising amount of the game playable. It covers the very start of the game all the way up to meeting DARPA Chief Donald Anderson.
who's that?
You can even play around with the SOCOM if you search the truck by the helipad, and I think it's an absolutely perfect demo. Why? Well, because from that moment, I was hooked. I didn't want to see more, I had to see more. I needed to see more. I'm not ashamed to admit, I played the demo countless times. I knew that helipad and the hangar sections like the back of my hand. Snake's lines of
Behind D.
And
A surveillance camera?
are etched into my mind forever because of this demo. And you have no idea how long a wait it felt to finally play the damn thing. No idea. But that day finally came. February 26th. I'd saved up my pocket money and my mother and grandmother went into town to pick it up for me while I was at school. And I'm not ashamed to admit this, but it felt like the single longest day of school that I'd ever experienced. And yeah, that might be kind of sad, but children. I remember being stood at a bus stop waiting for the ride home. My very, admittedly archaic mobile phone chimes. I look down, and it's a message from my family. And it read, "We've got your game." Now the wait was even more painful. I think, thinking back as well, I think the bus might have been late, which makes things even worse. And, to make matters even worse, it didn't just drop me straight off outside my home. No. We don't do things easy here, not in this country. I had about a 10 to 15 minute walk on top of that. It seemed like an absolute eternity. I get home and there it is. I can see it just sat there in the living room. I have dinner and then I go straight into my bedroom and snatch the game up on the way there and I play it. And I play it. And I play it, and I play it some more. By the end of the weekend, I've already finished my first playthrough and started my second. It was the first game I actually remember from that era playing that much in such a short span of time. Well, I say such a short span of time. In such a span of time, so solidly, that I was able to finish it within 2 days. And yeah, and like I said, I already started my second playthrough by the end of the weekend. Why? Well, because I wanted to see the alternate ending and to play around with the item that I'd unlocked for finishing the first playthrough. But you know, we'll get to that another time. From that day forward, I was a fan for life. And the rest, as they say, is history. Actually, to say I'm a fan of the series is a massive understatement. So you know what? I'm going to be taking a look at the series as a whole. There will probably be a few omissions such as Metal Gear Solid Mobile, Portable Ops, and the Acid series. Unless you can convince me otherwise, because honestly, card games are not my forte at all. But the rest I will be covering in some way or another. Most of the games will be the versions included in the Metal Gear Solid Legacy Collection on the PlayStation 3, which I should say is absolutely the best way to play these games, and I cannot recommend it enough. I've wanted to make a proper video on these games ever since I first started this channel. And what with the pandemic, I was finally able to sit down and plan all of this out, and I've written so many words. Let's look now, what? Like, I've not even finished writing the other videos, and I'm already close to 20,000 words. Plus, it was a great excuse for me to replay all of the games all over again, so honestly, it's a win-win for me. Let's just crack on with things. With all that out of the way, let's just stop delaying any further and crack on with part 1 of the Metal Gear Solid Retrospective. Whoa, slow down. Did you not just read the title? It said Metal Gear, not Metal Gear Solid. No, we've got to start at the very, very beginning, which means that it's time for a trip into the past. And also, that means it's time for a history lesson. In the mid-1980s, a young whippersnapper by the name of Hideo Kojima is trying to find his feet, attempting to enter the film industry, with his end goal being that of directing films. This, unfortunately, did not come to pass, and Kojima found his way into game development instead. In 1986, Kojima would be hired by Konami, where, of course, he would go on to work on the Metal Gear series, with the first being released on the MSX home computer.
No chance, Dad, this is MSX, mate.
Ironically, when joining, he hoped to be developing games for the NES, or the Famicom as it's known in Japan, because the colour palette on the MSX was, and I quote, too restrictive. This of course wasn't the first game he worked on. He first worked on a sequel to Antarctic Adventure titled Penguin Adventure. For its time, the sequel was rather ambitious, adding far more to the experience than its predecessor. Kojima also started designing a game titled Lost World. Look, everything I found online said, it's written as Lost World, not Lost World. I thought it was a translation issue, but apparently, from what people can gather, it was a weird combination of like World Wars and the Lost World, so Lost World. It's weird, isn't it? Anyway, this was ultimately cancelled as it was deemed too complex for the MSX. And then it happened. Hideo Kojima was tasked with taking over a project titled Metal Gear. Hardware limitations of the MSX itself actually worked into the game's favour, as it forced Kojima and his team to change the gameplay into a style that actually encouraged the player to avoid detection and conflict, and thus, Metal Gear became a stealth adventure game, with The Great Escape being one of its key influences, and do get used to this, because Kojima has been heavily influenced by film during his time in the game industry. Of course, it doesn't sound impressive now, but you have to remember, there weren't many games like this back in the day, and that ultimately allowed it to stand out amongst everything else. So, plonk yourself into the time period. You'd have been playing games like this, or even this. So imagine how unique of an experience this must have been for some players. The game would release on July 13th, meaning this is a month and a half older than I am. Jesus Christ, that's insane. The game takes place in the year of 1995, where a fictional and heavily fortified state known as Outer Heaven has been developing a bipedal tank codenamed Metal Gear, a weapon that is capable of firing nuclear warheads from any location. The legendary mercenary that created Outer Heaven is shrouded in mystery, with the world not knowing who he truly is. A special forces unit known as Foxhound sends in one of their best men, codenamed Grey Fox. However, communications with him ceases, with his last transmission consisting of the words, Metal Gear. Foxhound Commander Big Boss, don't laugh, sends in their newest recruit to Outer Heaven in an attempt to rescue Grey Fox and destroy Metal Gear, and that man is codenamed Solid Snake. And so it begins, arguably one of the greatest video game franchises in history. It's admittedly so weird playing this now, especially knowing what the series would become and how it would evolve over time. It feels so incredibly grounded in comparison to the insanity that would be coming later, and so very, very small in scale. Considering its age, Metal Gear doesn't look all that bad graphically. There's a good combination and mixture of colours to help bring the game world to life as well. The animation is admittedly very simplistic, with basically 2 frames of walking animation per direction, and if a weapon is equipped, Snake is holding a rifle, regardless of the weapon the player is using. And you better believe it's tough. As you'd expect, it's ill-advised to go in all guns blazing. The AI is pretty simplistic, mind you, and you should be able to easily sneak around them, or punch them into oblivion. No, really, look, you punch them and they just cease to exist. But if they do spot you, then good luck. Once spotted, you will see the very first incarnation of the iconic exclamation mark. If an enemy sentry has 1 above their head, then only enemies on the screen will converge on your position, and if you move to the next screen, you'll be safe. However, if 2 exclamation marks appear above them, then you'd better be prepared for a fight, as every enemy in the area will be gunning for you, and moving off screen will not save you. So be on your toes and make sure to stock up on rations. In terms of the audio department, it's okay. It's nothing fancy, but it's fine. The music does a good job and didn't become as tiresome or as repetitive as I feared it would. It fits the gameplay and the environments quite nicely, actually. The boss fights probably stand out the most in terms of the music. Sound effects are very simplistic, but again, like the music, they do a decent enough job and aren't exactly a mark against the game itself. I'm not really sure there's that much else to say really, it's all very basic, but again, does the job. Now, despite how old this is, it's a pretty epic adventure for its time. There are a surprising amount of different areas of Outer Heaven to explore, and while graphically they don't look too different, there are subtle colour palette changes that give you the sense of a new location. It's admittedly not much, but it does help differentiate the areas so you won't find yourself getting lost too often. There's also a fair amount of small puzzle solving and lots and lots and lots of keycards and equipment to collect, which is something the series is known for. And yes, of course the cardboard box is here. Along with the radio support team, there's always a cardboard box in a Metal Gear entry. Speaking of the radio support team, as the series evolved and changed over the years, this has been one of the mechanics that has always remained in some fashion. And as always, the team is very, very useful, especially if you're stuck at any point in the game, and trust me, you will get stuck at some point unless you're using a walkthrough. For example, early on you need to find a remote-controlled missile to blow up a generator which will turn off the electrified flooring. That sounds familiar. If you haven't already found it, you can contact Schneider, a member of the Resistance opposing Outer Heaven, who will tell you roughly where in the base it is. Unfortunately, they never outright tell you where anything is, so on one hand it's that's quite frustrating. On the other hand, it does encourage you to explore, and honestly, you'll likely stumble across something else you need while you're doing so. Other members of the support team are Diane, no, not that Diane.
Fuck you.
A former member of a punk rock band. No, really, this is what, I'm not making this up. She's a former member of a rock band who knows of boss weaknesses and can be essential if you're struggling with one in particular. Big Boss himself, the leader of Foxhound, who needs absolutely no introduction, and Jennifer, who's visited Outer Heaven masquerading as a member of the medical team, and she is vital, and if you don't win her trust, you simply cannot finish the game. It's actually impossible. You see, there are various key items that she supplies you with throughout your journey, such as the antidote for scorpion venom and the compass, which are both needed to cross the desert safely to Building 3. She also unlocks the room that gives you the rocket launcher. Again, you ain't finishing the game without the rocket launcher. Although she does just say, yeah, thanks Jen. Thankfully, it's in the next room, because when I read that, my heart sank. At one point, you're in a massive room that's essentially a maze. Now, that doesn't seem too bad, does it? But to find your way out to the next section, you have to move along punching every piece of wall until you find one you can blow up with C4. And then you do it again, and then you do it again. This isn't particularly difficult or cryptic, sure, but it can feel like busy work. But this isn't as irritating as the secret rooms. At one point, you have to find an officer's uniform so that you can gain access to Building 2. And yes, Schneider is no help in finding this. To find it, you have to go to the basement, go to the very far left and punch along the wall until you discover a wall that can be blown up using C4, and there you will find a uniform just sitting in the room. It's just there. It's just sitting there because of course it is. Where else would you keep it? But that's not even close to being as bad as the keycards and locked doors, honestly. Whenever you come to a door, you're not told which card you need to unlock the door, and this is particularly annoying when you have all 8 cards. And no, they don't all just mash together like they do in Metal Gear Solid 1 onwards. They don't do that. Each individual card is its own item. You have to open your inventory, select a different card, close the inventory, find out it's wrong, open the inventory again, select a card, close the inventory, find out it's wrong, open the inventory again, select a card, and it doesn't ruin the game or anything, but it's really, really bloody annoying, and I cannot stand it. Oh, and make sure you have at least half health at all times, because there are rooms filled with gas behind locked doors. This means you are guaranteed to take damage when you exit a poisoned room, if the door's locked. When the door leading out of the gas room is locked, it means you'll need to take off the gas mask and equip a key card, which means you are guaranteed to take damage, which is even worse if you've equipped the wrong card. Does feel a tad unfair, and I'm saying that through gritted teeth because I hate the cards enough as it is. The game is, surprisingly, quite challenging for its time, and you should expect to die a lot, especially in earlier portions of the game, because as you rescue POWs, your health will increase as your rank increases as well, and you'll be able to carry more rations and rounds of ammunition, while on top of also collecting more improved weapons and silencers for those weapons. Speaking of difficulty, can I just say that those floor traps can absolutely get in the bin? They're up there along with the keycards in terms of things I detest in this game. If Snake's toe so much as encroaches on the hole, he instantly dies. And I do mean instantly, there's no way out of those holes. But what's amusing, Snake just kind of hovers above these pit traps. It's just a funny visual. Well, at least I think so. Despite the difficulty of the game itself, it's also oddly kind to you in terms of item pickups. If you're running low on either ammunition or rations, you just need to find a room that contains either and pick it up, leave the room, and then go back into the room to find that it's respawned. It's really, really kind. To its credit, the game does play surprisingly well. Everything has a feel of clunkiness to it at times. There's a nice array of weapons and equipment for you to collect in your adventure, with every item having purpose at some point during the mission. What about the boss fights? The Metal Gear Solid series is known for memorable boss fights. Well, maybe not 5, but, well, We'll get to that at some point. These ones are pretty simplistic, but you know, I can't really hold that against the game. Let's just list them all, shall we? We have a tank, a Hind D, a construction vehicle, shot maker, machine gun kid, fire trooper, dirty duck. Sorry. Dirty Duck, who unfortunately doesn't throw exploding ducks at you, but instead boomerangs. Bloody Brad, twin cyberoids, cyberoids, and Metal Gear itself, which is probably the toughest and best fight in the game, and the legendary mercenary and leader of Outer Heaven, but we'll get to him later. If your first jump into the series was on the PlayStation 1 or later, then yeah, these bosses don't really seem particularly memorable. I actually had to look them all up again for this video, which is something I won't have to do for Metal Gear Solid 1 onwards. Until Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, the easiest way the West could play this would be the NES port. Unfortunately, this is a notoriously inferior port, with the game feeling far more difficult, complete with an entire jungle section not present in the original version, which also just looks really uninspired and all kinds of ugly, even for an NES game. And worst of all is the omission of Metal Gear itself. No, really, I'm not lying, that's right. The title super weapon itself isn't even in the game, despite being on the box and cartridge artwork. Instead of the bipedal tank, ready for it? Instead of the bipedal tank, NES owners got a supercomputer in a boring, drab, grey room. Now, whoa. Stop it, guys. I can only take so much excitement. Now, the rest of the game is intact, but it's not the version I would recommend playing. Another issue with the NES version is that it just feels as though the difficulty is sometimes there solely to artificially extend the length of the game, as sometimes you'll exit a room and the default position of a guard will be looking directly at you. It's really frustrating. It's challenging for all the wrong reasons. To make matters worse, some continue points mean you lose a lot of progress, and I do mean a lot. And despite all of this, the NES version still sold very, very well, moving 1 million units in the US, and, more importantly, scored pretty well back in the day, making its way onto multiple top NES games lists, such as 104th on Nintendo Power's top 200 NES games list, Game Informer ranking it at 53rd place, Electronic Gaming Monthly as the 35th best NES game, and gamesradar ranked it as the 6th best game of all time for the classic console. That is not too shabby for what is widely regarded as an inferior port of the original. That's pretty good. Anyway, getting back to the MSX version, having saved Grey Fox and progressing deeper into the facility, Big Boss will begin giving you strange orders, such as telling you to turn around and leave, or even telling you to turn the game system off itself. That's right, kids, Metal Gear Solid 2 was not the first game to do this.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
But why would he be doing this? Well, it's quite simple, really. The man in charge of Outer Heaven, the man behind everything, is Big Boss. Yeah, okay, it's not exactly a massive twist anymore, I know, but back in the day, this must have been pretty shocking. But think about it, there are clues. Big Boss has been trying to sabotage this mission from the very beginning. Hear me out. Firstly, he sends in Foxhound's best agent, Grey Fox, purposely setting a trap for him. Secondly, he sends in Solid Snake, a rookie member of the team, expecting him to fail miserably. And that's the reason these bizarre orders are coming completely out of the blue. He's panicking. Ultimately, underestimating Snake would be Big Boss's downfall. And you know what, it does make some sense at least, and it's a nice twist, particularly for a game released, I remind you, in 1987. After Metal Gear is destroyed by attacking the legs in order supplied by Dr. Madnar, the creator of the machine, Big Boss decides to take matters into his own hands and confronts Snake himself, one-on-one. he shows, despite his age, that he hasn't lost his edge. That is until Snake fires a rocket into his face. Luckily, Snake escapes just in time as the facility explodes. However, a post-credit sequence sees Big Boss vowing revenge on Snake. Metal Gear has not aged particularly bad, actually, and you should definitely play it if you're a curious fan of the series and haven't done so already. Now, you might be wondering why I skimmed so heavily on the story, and it's because it's very thin. I alluded to it at the beginning, but this isn't the big, expansive, and insane epic that we've come to expect from the series. It's a much more grounding and charming little stealth adventure that would kickstart a cracking video game series. It was really fun to return to see the origins of this franchise. Now, if I have to be honest, it does get a little frustrating towards the end due to the cryptic nature and some of the difficulty, but honestly, the majority of the game is just really fun. It's a really fun little experience. But I would play it with a walkthrough, just save yourself that headache. And just like its NES counterpart, the game scored well and sold well in Japan, making the MSX magazine's top 20 best-selling MSX games for around 5 months. And it was seen by Game Machine as a reason to purchase the system. That is pretty good going in my opinion. And this series would only improve going forward. But before we look at Metal Gear 2, I want to take a quick, short detour. Players would have to wait 3 years for a sequel. Well, no, actually 2 sequels, with only one being canonical. Are you confused? Well, let me explain. Despite the inferiority of the NES port, it was still a successful seller on the system, and like we said, it scored pretty well across the board, so a sequel was naturally greenlit. NES owners would receive Snake's Revenge in 1990, with Kojima having no involvement with it, and honestly, it's really not all that bad of a sequel. Set 3 years after Operation Intrude N313, Snake, now a lieutenant of Foxhound, is tasked with infiltrating a facility in the Middle East, where a new model of Metal Gear is being developed, of course. This time, he's joined in the field by 2 additional operatives, Nick Meyer, a former member of the Marines and an explosives expert, and John Turner, a former Navy intelligence officer and a pro at infiltration missions. Now, of course, Snake's mission isn't going to be as straightforward as he'd hope, as there will be various twists and turns, spies, and a confrontation with a cybernetically enhanced Big Boss. I'm not joking, we have Solid Snake versus Robo Big Boss. Now, similar to the original NES version, you start in the jungle before making your way into an enemy facility. However, this time you do start the game with a knife and a pistol right off the bat, which is quite nice honestly. Plus, there are the aforementioned support characters that drop in with you, although they do immediately bugger off on their own until the plot calls for them. And new inclusions are side-scrolling action sections as well. It's a nice addition and does mix things up quite nicely, even if Snake does look a little too jacked in this version. He looks more like Chris Redfield circa Resident Evil 5. Honestly, it's pretty good graphically across the board, and it looks far and away better than the original on the NES. Not only that, but in my opinion, it plays better as well. The controls feel much more refined this time around, but it is still really tough. And the difficulty, similar to the first game, does feel unfair in places. For example, sometimes it's absolutely bloody impossible to avoid detection. When you exit some rooms or screens, enemies and searchlights are either placed directly on your spawn point or are looking directly at you the second the screen loads. Which means the alarm goes off. It will elicit audible groans from you, which means they learnt absolutely nothing from the original. Oh, and another thing, even just getting into the facility can be a pain in the arse. Also, the keycard situation is still here, so the keycards are still a massive bloody problem. It is just such busy work when you come to a locked door and sometimes have to go through your entire bloody collection of cards. But if you liked Metal Gear 1, then you're probably going to enjoy this. It's more of the same, just with a touch more polish. In terms of how it was received by critics though, well, it's been difficult to track that down honestly. But from what I did find, it seemed to be a resounding, It's by no means a bad game. It's just okay. However, Kojima's true sequel to the original was soon to release. But we'll get to that in part 2 of this series. Join me next time as we take a look at the real sequel, Metal Gear 2: Solid Snake. Well, that's it. That wraps up part 1 of this Metal Gear Solid retrospective that's probably going to take me... I don't even know how long it's going to take me. I'm probably still be doing this at this time next year, and I'll probably be only on, like, part 4 or something, knowing my luck. But yes, thank you all so much for watching. It's been a long time coming, and it's taken even longer because, as you might have noticed if you are familiar with this channel, I have gone through somewhat of a rebrand. We are no longer Lost in the Warp Pipe. I am now Matticus Finch. So this was the first video of the rebrand, which is quite a big deal for me because obviously rebranding is, even though I'm a very small channel, is still very scary because you have to do whole new graphics and you have to get your name out there again and people forget it's you and all that bollocks. But also, it was the first part in covering probably my favourite video game franchise of all time, so it was a bit of an undertaking, honestly. You might have noticed that I didn't really go into characterization of Snake, the influences of creating the character and all that jazz, mainly because I don't think he really comes into his own, and that isn't really brought into the forefront until Metal Gear Solid 1. There are elements of that in Metal Gear 2, which we will cover, but Metal Gear 1 is such a grounded, small little experience, like I already said in the video. So I didn't really feel it was the best place to discuss the characteristics of the characters. So we will be doing that at some point in the future. Like I said, probably Metal Gear Solid 1 when I finally get to it in like 500 years time.
You never know.
So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I am feeling incredibly inspired at the moment, so expect more videos more frequently. I know I need to do more of the Alien franchise videos. I want to cover, like, Shadow the Beast. I for some reason, want to cover The Crow City of Angels, the PS1 game, because I apparently hate myself. And I will hopefully see you at some point in the future, so until then, take care. And yes, I know that the art of Snake on the box and the cartridge is inspired by Kyle Reese from The Terminator by James Cameron. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows this.